Where are functions and our gatherings? The beginning is music and the ending is music, and we have 3 minutes of Quran and that's it. And that's just, maybe to make sure we don't incur the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through all of this, majority of these children in Gaza have been raised throughout multiple wars. Their muhabba of the Quran didn't stop. Their love of the Quran never stopped. They were never deterred from loving the Quran. But yet we live in a society, we live in a country in the United States of America, where if we tell people to be quiet during the recitation of the Quran, they have a hard time doing this. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh amma ba'd a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim bismillahir rahmanir rahim إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات ثم لم يتوبوا فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ذلك الفوز الكبير إن بطش ربك لشديد صدق الله العظيم وصدق مولانه النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك ومن الشاهدين ومن الشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. These are ayat from Surah Buruj. In these ayat, ayat number 10, 11 and 12, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, indeed those who have tortured the believing men and believing women and then have not repented will have the punishment of hell, and they will have the punishment of the burning. Indeed, those who have believed in their righteous deeds will have gardens beneath which rivers flow. That is the great attainment. Indeed, the assault or the vengeance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Lord, is severe. So today we will be talking about a sahabi by the name of Khabbab ibn al-Arath. He was a sahabi, a companion of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He also has a interesting story of how he even became a companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That this is now how he started off. This is not, his life didn't start off in Makkah al-Mukarramah, and this wasn't basically the trajectory of what was going to happen with him. He didn't even get to choose his own profession. He didn't even get to choose his own profession. So the trajectory of his life was not of his own choosing, was not of his own thinking, nor was it probably what his family was thinking. And the sort of torture and abuse that he went through, and the torture and abuse that other Sahaba went through, that what we're seeing today in Palestine, Lebanon, Sudan, Kashmir, Burma, places like this, this is nothing new to the Muslims. Rather, this is what's been happening to the Muslims for centuries upon centuries. Wherever Muslims go, they liberate lands, they free people from oppression. Then the idea of letting people practice their religion within your country as they are living there. Not oppressing them, not forcing them. La ikraha fid deen. There's no compulsion in religion. Not forcing anyone to become Muslim. So there was a man by the name of Khabbab ibn al-Arath. One time he complained to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, will you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us? Will you supplicate to Allah for us? The Prophet ﷺ said, amongst those before you, a believer would be seized, a ditch would be dug for him, and he would be thrown into it. Then he would bring a saw. Then they would bring a saw, and that would be put on top of his head to split him into two halves. And his flesh would be torn from his bone with iron combs. Yet all of this did not cause them to abandon their religion. By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this religion will prevail until a rider travels from Yemen to Hadramaut, fearing no one but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the wolf, lest it trouble his sheep. Rather, you are impatient. And the sort of torture Hazrat Khabbab radiallahu anhu and other Sahaba like Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu, Hazrat Abdullah ibn Masud radiallahu anhu, they were going through was unimaginable. And it's unfathomable to us that something like this could happen to us. That Hazrat Abdullah ibn Masud radiallahu anhu was not a slave, but he was a very skinny individual, he was a very skinny man. And one time he went to the Kaaba, the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was reciting the Quran. And they started beating him, the Quraysh started beating him. And they beat him so much that they didn't leave a spot where he didn't have a bruise mark. And our beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ goes to Hazrat Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and he starts, patting him, Nabi of Allah ﷺ, taking care of a sahabi, looking out for him. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud looking out for him. And as he's taking care of him, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was like, Prophet ﷺ, he asked him, he's like, can I go and recite Quran again tomorrow? As the Prophet ﷺ is tending to his wounds, he is worried about giving da'wah again the next day. Our beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his situation was such that, these days if somebody goes to give a speech to a city or a town or something like this, and or even Jummah and only 2 people show up, the speakers get upset. Nobody showed up. What is my izzat? I'm a speaker, I speak in front of 10,000 people, how come no one came here? Sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would have no one with him to give da'wah to. Sometimes he would have 1 person, he would give them da'wah. Sometimes there would be 10 people, he would give them da'wah. He went through all of those struggles, but it never deterred him. It never stopped him from his mission of nubuwah. It didn't stop him. It never slowed him down. But these days, our mindsets and our egos have become so high that if we throw a party and instead of 100, only 75 people show up. I threw a party and only 75 people showed up. What is my izzat? What is my respect in society? This can't happen. Our Nabi, it didn't deter him if nobody showed up when he came to give da'wah. Didn't stop him, even one bit. And this is why Sahaba were so disciplined. When the teacher is so disciplined, when the teacher is so determined, how can the students not be disciplined and determined? When the teacher doesn't get stopped by anything, how can the students get stopped by anything? When the teacher teaches his students perseverance, when he teaches them sabr in all situations, how can the students not have success at such levels which were unimaginable to anybody before them or anybody after them? A woman by the name of Ammar, she belonged to the Khuza'a tribe, and she went looking for a slave. And she wanted to buy herself like a domestic, slave, somebody to take care of the house duties. But she saw a young boy who was not in his teens yet even. And she saw he was strong and healthy, and he could do other tasks as well. So she paid the money and she bought him. And she asked him, what's your name? He said, Khabbab. She said, what's your father's name? He said, Al-Arath. And where did you come from? Najd. He wasn't from the vicinity of Makkah, Medina. He was more closer to Iraq. And she said, oh, so then you're an Arab. He said, yes, I'm from the Banu Tamim clan. And how did you become a slave and end up in Makkah? She asked him. He said, one of the Arab tribes raided our territory. They took our cattle, captured our women and children, and I was amongst the youth who were captured. And I was passed from one hand to the other until I ended up in Makkatul Mukarramah. So what she did is she saw he had strength and he had intelligence. So she placed him with a blacksmith for him to learn the trade of making weapons such as swords and shields. And he learned this craft very quickly and at a very high level. And he was very intelligent, he was very wise, and he wasn't corrupt. If somebody pays 10 dinars, he'd be like, okay, I'll keep 9, I'll give her 9, I'll keep 1, put it on the side. He would never do that. He would always give his master, slave master, all the money that he earned from the day. And then he saw the Arab society at that time and what they were going through, and he was hoping that there would be some hope for them. And when that hope came, which was in the means of our beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he went to the Prophet ﷺ and he learned from him. He ended up becoming a Muslim. And he listened to the Prophet ﷺ, and he accepted the kalima of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Muhammad ﷺ is a servant and messenger. He was amongst the first 10 people to accept Islam. And so then what happened is, Ammar, she found out that he has possibly accepted Islam. She became very angry. She went to her brother, Siba' ibn Abdul Uzza, that he considered himself the slave of Al-Uzza, one of their idols at that time. And so he gathered a gang of young men, and they went to him and they asked him, they went to the shop and they asked him, they said, we've heard some news that we've heard some news. He said, what is this news? He said, we've heard you've become Muslim. You've left your religion of your ancestors and accepted the new religion. The man from Banu Hashim, you follow him now. So he said, I haven't given up my religion. Rather, I only believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one God who has no partners, and I reject the idols. I believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a servant of God and His messenger. No sooner did Khabbab radiallahu anhu say these words, that they started beating him. And they beat him so much until he became unconscious. And then, when others heard this news in Makkah, other slaves became bold and they started accepting Islam. And for these slave owners who were from the Quraysh, who were idol worshippers, this was heartbreaking. This was backbreaking. They were like, everybody's becoming a deviant according to them. And so, he was just a blacksmith. And for them, a blacksmith who was working as a slave, becoming a Muslim is a big deal. So, all of the Kuffar Quraysh, they were very upset. And Siba, the brother of his slave master, they would torture him. What they would do is, they would punish Khabbab as much as they could, Khabbab radiallahu anhu. And they would, they would take the rocks, basically make sure they're warm. They would put on an armor, an iron armor, lay him on these hot rocks, and essentially lay him there or drag him. And the way that the fire would be put out was by his own blood and his own pus. This is how the fire went out. This is the sort of torture the early believers of Islam had to go through. Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu having stones, boulders essentially, placed on his chest, being dragged across the sands of Makkah. And he keeps saying, Ahad, Ahad. And as they're torturing Khabbab radiallahu anhu, they say, what do you say about Muhammad now? He says, he is the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messenger. He has come with the religion of guidance and truth to lead us from the darkness into the light. And then they asked him, what do you think of Lat and Uzza? He would reply, they are two idols, deaf and dumb, that cannot cause harm nor bring any benefit. And this would enrage them even more. And then there came a point in time where Mar, she started getting Khabbab radiallahu anhu branded on his face. She would punish him. And then finally there came a time when Mar became very sick. And they had to brand her herself. And when Hazrat Khabbab radiallahu anhu got this opportunity, he traveled and he left Makkah and he migrated and moved to Medina. But before this happened, there was a story, there's a very famous story. And the story is of Hazrat Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. That when Hazrat Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu made the decision that he will end the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He made this decision. He said, I'm going to go and end him. He's causing too much discord in society in Makkah. And when he was going, there was a man by the name of Na'im radiallahu anhu who had become Muslim. He said, oh Umar, where are you going? He says, I'm going to end the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says, he's trying to deviate him. He doesn't want him to do anything. The Prophet, he has a little bit of light conversation. He's like, do you know, amongst your own people, amongst your own family, somebody's become Muslim. He says, who? He says, your sister Fatima. Becomes even more enraged. He goes to the house, and as he gets to this house, he hears the Quran being recited. طه ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى تنزيلا ممن خلق الأرض والسماوات العلى صدق الله العظيم. And he's like, what's going on? So he goes and he knocks on the door really hard. And so his brother-in-law, Sa'id ibn Zayd, him and his wife Fatima ibn al-Khattab, they both become Muslim. The one teaching them was Khabbab radiallahu anhu. And so he says to Khabbab radiallahu anhu, Khabbab, hide. You know the temper and the strength of Umar, and we know what you've been through, go hide. And so Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu goes inside of the house, and he asks his sister, what were you reciting, what were you reading? And she says, oh no, we were talking amongst each other. And he starts beating his sister. And then his brother-in-law comes and intervenes, and he starts beating him. It goes back and forth, he's beating them both, and finally his sister, obviously if Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu had this anger, this was no less, this was his sister. She got angry at him. She says, if you're the son of Khattab, I'm the daughter of Khattab, do what you want to me. But do you have enough guts that you're beating a woman? Although I'm your sister, you're beating a woman. Is this what being a man is? So Hazrat Umar then backs down. Then he realizes he's doing this in a fit of rage. And he says, okay, what is this you're reading? Tell me. And Hazrat Umar was one of the learned ones. He knew how to read and write. So Hazrat Umar he becomes very impressed with what he's reading. And when Hazrat Khabbab hears this, he jumps out. He says, the Prophet was just making dua about this, that either you or Amr ibn al-Hasham to become Muslim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted you, so He takes him to Dar al-Arqam to become Muslim. So Hazrat Khabbab radiallahu anhu was, even though his life was always at danger, he was still so eager to teach people about Islam, and he was learned in the Quran, and he wanted to teach people the Quran. Could you imagine this? He's going through all of this, but yet whenever he gets a free chance, or whenever he gets a free opportunity, he's teaching others Quran. Going through all of this. He knows if he gets caught teaching the Quran, he will get beat relentlessly. But that didn't stop him. And this is why we see from our brothers and sisters overseas, although they don't have any of the luxuries or any amount of money that we have, they don't have the cars we have, they don't have any of the things which we have, but the resilience is there. You see, you hear about all of these children who are dying in missile strikes. Hafiz, 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 memorizer of the Quran. That through all of this, majority of these children in Gaza have been raised throughout multiple wars. Their muhabba of the Quran didn't stop. Their love of the Quran never stopped. They were never deterred from loving the Quran. But yet we live in a society, we live in a country in the United States of America, where if we tell people to be quiet during the recitation of the Quran, they have a hard time doing this. Where our functions and our gatherings, the beginning is music and the ending is music, and we have 3 minutes of Quran and that's it. And that's just, maybe to make sure we don't incur the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we have very little respect of the Quran. We have very little respect. If you ask somebody to dress modestly because you're going to a gathering of Quran, what's wrong with my dress? What's wrong with what I'm wearing? What, do you think you're better than me? No, man. We're not saying any of that. Can everybody move forward, inshallah? There's space, there's brothers coming in. We're not saying any of that. We're not insulting anybody. All we're asking is have a little bit of adab, have a little bit of etiquette, and have a little bit of respect for the Quran, for the people of Quran, for the gatherings of Quran. But we've become such a society that's become desensitized of religion, that's become desensitized of the adab of Islam, that's become desensitized to the adab of the Quran, because we have taken our role models. Our role models are non-Muslim. Our role models are non-Muslim. The systems which we love are non-Muslim systems. We covet the person who drives a $200,000 car. Oh, look at his car. He's bought it at interest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like interest. The Prophet ﷺ didn't like interest. Why are you salivating over this car which he has bought under the ghadab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is so impressive about this car? You're better off in your $5,000 paid off car. At least you haven't incurred the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to acquire this car. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made interest impermissible. The Prophet ﷺ instilled this belief in us that interest is impermissible. Why? Because interest is a tool to take advantage of the poor. It's a tool to take advantage of the poor and give them the facade that they have something. And tomorrow, if you can't make one payment, they will take your car, they will take your house, they'll even take the clothing out of your closet. It's all on interest. So the Prophet ﷺ, he built a system. The Prophet ﷺ taught us a system. And the Prophet ﷺ taught us where to give respect, when to give respect, and why to give respect. And we put all of these things on the side to gain the respect of people who don't even care about you. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save our iman in Islam. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save the iman and Islam of our brothers and sisters overseas. And may He protect them from the tyrants who are destroying their lives and their progeny. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.